Great. Well, welcome everyone. Again, I'm Jimmy Whittyfield Jr. And thank you for prioritizing your time today on Wednesday to be here to listen to me talk about children and adolescents' with problematic sexual behavior and specifically safety planning for these kids. I'm super excited. Haruv USA is an amazing organization. I was just telling Dejan before we started just what a highlight of my career it has been to be and stay connected with Haruv USA over, gosh, the last maybe 5 years or so. So really very excited. All right, so a little bit about me. I get really nervous when I present and train. I would say that you're all staring at me, but since we're virtually, like most of you are looking away at your email, your phones, your lunch, I'm all good with that. As long as you hear me, and you'll have access to the information, that's the main thing. So I'm a little less nervous, but because I'm sitting in front of a camera and looking directly into it, that then makes me a little nervous. So I use humor to help me manage my emotional regulation when especially I'm feeling anxious or nervous. And I use humor to make things a little bit easier for people to hear and receive. So my humor can really skate a very fine line between okay and inappropriate. I don't ever intend to offend anybody nor minimize anyone's experience or a child or family's experience. It's just a style that I have picked up and used both personally and professionally. So keep that in mind. I will tell you though, maybe we'll start off with something fun. And this was, I think, going to be one of my new favorites. For everyone who completes an evaluation, you'll get a free guitar with no strings attached. Get it? Guitar, no strings attached. Had you really been paying attention, you knew there would be strings attached because you have to complete the evaluation in order to get the guitar with no strings. So just telling you, that was the litmus test to see who's paying attention. I see some of you smiling. I see an emoji. So others of you, we're going to have to pay attention to. There's even a wah wah in that one hurt, Rebecca. That hurts. Um, so a little bit more about me. I am a licensed professional counselor living in the Oklahoma City metropolitan area. For the last 2 years, I have worked at the National Children's Advocacy Center, which is located in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm the project director for the Training and Technical Assistance for Child Abuse Professionals project, which is a federally funded project funding through the Victims of Child Abuse Act. NCAC has been a historic grantee of this particular grant and also is awarded the grant for the Southern Regional Children's Advocacy Center. So if you're not familiar with NCAC and the Children's Advocacy Center model, I encourage you to visit our website and also just kind of explore online. Children's advocacy centers are kind of the one-stop shop for services provided to children who've experienced child maltreatment. It's considered a best practice model and intended to help reduce the additional risk of adversity or trauma to children and their families once a disclosure has been made. NCAC in Huntsville, Alabama just happened to be the very first children's advocacy center and created that model. Now there are over 900 accredited CACs in the United States, and CACs are developing or exist in numerous other countries. So just kind of keep that in mind. Before I worked at NCAC, I worked briefly for the state of Oklahoma at the Oklahoma Commission on Children and Youth, where I supported multidisciplinary child abuse teams that were not affiliated with children's advocacy centers. And those are throughout Oklahoma, about 37 teams then. Going backwards, one more change in my career. For 17 years, I worked at the Center on Child Abuse and Neglect at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, where my primary experience was doing clinical assessment and treatment of children and adolescents with problematic and illegal sexual behavior. So my experience is working with children as young as 3 and as old as 19 who've engaged in some type of problematic, harmful, or illegal sexual behavior. And then also doing clinical training and other types of technical assistance for professionals across the United States. And fortunately, some in a few other countries. So that's where I come from. Otherwise, I'm an attractive 50-year-old cisgender male who uses he, him pronouns. I enjoy ketchup on everything, which this weekend I discovered I really enjoyed ketchup. Do not judge me. On my, I've always enjoyed it on pancakes, but this weekend it was pancakes with fresh sliced strawberries and blueberries with absolutely delicious with some ketchup. Um, it's not everyone's cup of tea, as it were, but it is mine. All right, let me share my screen and we will get started officially because I'm sure you do not want to hear any more about what goes into my ketchup bottle. So just keep that in mind as well. I am feeling a little tired today. I rode my bicycle all the way here to do this presentation, and so it's a long drive from my front door to my bedroom where I'm at. It's such a long and arduous bicycle ride that my bicycle fell over. It was just too tired. Okay, I caught some of you there. That was a slow burn. Hopefully, you're in the right place. Today, we are going to be talking about children and adolescents who've engaged in problematic sexual behavior and specifically decisions around safety planning of those children. And that will get into a little bit of placement decisions, contact with other children, etc. The presentation today is really to help provide an overview, to either start a conversation with you or to help jog your brain into thinking about how we can better serve these children and adolescents. They're an amazing group of kids and families, though unfortunately, due to stigma and a lot of mythology, really don't get a fair shake. Clearly, what these children do is problematic and harmful to other children. There's no denying that or minimizing it at all. But ultimately, these are kids. And so our focus today is helping kids and what we can do. Before I get too far, let me just double check. Dejan, can you see the screen? Okay, thank you. I'm using a different version of screen share that doesn't outline my screen in green. So just want to make sure. Because my time and effort at the National Children's Advocacy Center is funded by a federal grant, I'm required to give a disclaimer about our grant and that I'm not speaking on behalf of the government. So everything I say today is from my own experience, will be based in research and prevailing best practices and thoughts about how to best help these children. Some of the slides were developed in conjunction with my friends and colleagues at the National Center on Sexual Behavior of Youth. That's also located here at the OU Health Sciences Center. Here in a moment, you'll get some websites of resources where you can go to. That will be one. I also want to recognize that some of the information today comes from a collaboration I had with Nikki Croto Johnson. She's with the the North Carolina Child Treatment Program, the Center for Child and Family Health. And so I just want to acknowledge that other people contribute to my knowledge and to the trainings that I do. Before we really venture into the topic, really in earnest, I want to take a moment for you to just remember that you are the most important people here. You're the most important people serving children and working directly with families or working with people who work directly with families. Because when you are at your best, when you are doing your work, when you are living at 100%, that means that you're at your very best for the children that ultimately receive services, whether that's from you or someone else. Today, we're going to be talking about basically child sexual abuse by other children and adolescents. There may be some times that you find yourself feeling a little bothered or distressed, and that could be because you yourself were the recipient or victim of problematic sexual behavior when you were a child, or maybe as an adult by another adult. Looking just kind of quickly at the windows that I can see in Zoom, I'm making an assumption that the majority of people that have joined the webinar today are female. And we know that females are significantly more likely to be sexually assaulted during their lifetime. And so as I'm talking about kids who initiate problematic sexual behavior, I know that for some of you, it may be, again, a reminder of your own assault experience. And so if you find yourself today feeling distressed because of a personal experience, or maybe you're reminded of an extremely difficult professional experience with a child or family or an adult, I want you to be able to recognize that and be okay with it. So when you're feeling distressed, having no judgment over it, please do not try to push it out of your mind. If you need to click off your camera for 90 seconds or so, take a deep breath, just do something to make sure that that feeling fully metabolizes, that you can acknowledge it, honor it, and then you can hopefully let it decrease in intensity. Um, and so this is where, self-care is really important. And to me, self-care is more than, a bubble bath with a glass of your favorite adult beverage, if that's your thing. When I think of self-care, I go to my doctor when I don't feel well. I make sure that I'm trying to eat healthy. I try to get some movement. I try to be in sunlight. But it also means that I'm doing my best to attend to my emotional needs and my spiritual needs, if that's applicable, and my psychological needs. So today I want you to do that. So if you need to step away, if you need to distract yourself for a moment, that's going to be okay. And remember, if those thoughts and feelings persist, you may need to reach out to someone, maybe a friend or family member, supervisor, or in some cases, a therapist. So you take care of you so you can continue helping the world take care of its children, right? Is that enough of a soapbox for that we need to be at our best? To really get into talking about kids with problematic sexual behavior, we're going to start with just a brief activity. This is a self-done activity, so just be comfortable in your seat. I'm going to ask you to imagine and picture some things, so that might be more comfortable to you if your eyes are closed. Your eyes can be opened with a soft focus somewhere. Um, but get comfortable and then really bring your attention to the memory or thought of a child or a teenager that you love intensely. A kid that is so special to you that just thinking of them brings on a rush of pleasurable emotions. This might be your own child or a cousin that's younger than you. It could be a nibbling a niece or nephew. It could be a kid in your neighborhood, in your faith community, a kid just in your life somewhere. But this is a kid that you love very much. You would do anything for. I want you to really picture this child or teenager in your mind. Get a clear picture of what they look like. Eyes, hair, face, etc. What about this kid makes them so special? What do they do that creates you to have so much love for this kid? Is it the way they smile, how kind and polite they are, or maybe how ornery they get, how they make you laugh, how gentle they are with maybe animals, how excited they get when the school semester or school year starts, or maybe when it ends? If you're thinking of an adolescent, maybe how hard they work to graduate or to get their learner's permit to drive or their first job. Um, but really think about what about this kid makes them so special. What kind of feelings do you have when you think about those things and you've got this image in your mind? Maybe you feel happy, excited, um, pride, satisfied, joy, elation. You might feel a little worry or anxiety because you want this kid to be successful. You want them to be happy and healthy. And sometimes that can make us a little worried. Um, but ultimately, I would assume that you're feeling significantly more positive or pleasurable emotions. What do you want for this kid? Do you want this kid, no matter their age, no matter who they are, do you want them to be successful? Do you want them to be president of the United States one day, an astronaut, a homemaker, a business person, a school teacher, law enforcement? What do you want for them? Do you want them to have good friends and fun experiences? Do you want them to safely experience maybe failure, right? As they are learning how to navigate their world around them, and you're there to help them. Think about what you're willing to do. Are you willing to be there to talk to them, hold them or hug them, comfort them, to encourage them, motivate them, remind them, right? What are you willing to do? Just let that sit with you for a second. Now I want you to imagine that you get a phone call and it's an adult, and that adult says that your special kid put their mouth on the genitals of a much younger child. Let that sit there for just a second. What are some of the thoughts that immediately come to mind? Not my kid. I'm sorry, what? Can you say that again? I think you said that was my kid that engaged in oral genital contact, or maybe you think oral sex with another kid. Where's my kid? Is my kid safe? I, I'm I don't know what to think. I'm scared. I'm worried. This couldn't be my kid. Oh my God, is my kid a pedophile? Is my kid dangerous? Or what about my other kids? What about the kid that they put their mouth on? What's happening? What are people going to do with my kid? Are the police going to show up? Is Child Protection Services going to show up and take all my kids out of my home? Am I going to have to go to court? Is my kid going to go to jail? Are they going to be on a registry for life? What do people think about me? Was this my fault? No, no, it's my kid's fault. No, it's this other person's fault. It's what's happening, what's happening. Maybe those are some of the thoughts and the feelings that we've had when we kind of had this jarring turn in this activity. Those are the thoughts and feelings of the parents and the caregivers of the children who initiate problematic sexual behavior with others. And when we can have an empathetic response, if you can remember, this could just as easily be your kid. And I'm, I don't intend to be rude here, but if you're thinking that would never be my kid, you are sadly mistaken. Problematic sexual behaviors happen across all ages, around the world, every kind of family, every kind of kid, rich, poor, black, white, gay, straight, um, devoutly religious, not religious, kids that have never been in trouble, kids that get into a lot of trouble. This could easily be any kid in the world. And so, what would you want if this were your kid? You would want professionals to cultivate hope, be transparent with you, collaborate. You are a partner in the response to this, to keep you informed and included, to get your opinion, help you understand, get you and your child connected to services as quickly as possible. You would want people to treat you with respect and dignity, not to judge you or your kid. And hopefully, most of all, you would want everyone to remember, this is my kid. This is not an adult, but this is a kid. 3 years old, 7, 12, 15, 17 kids. They are not fully formed human beings. Please don't treat them like they're an adult who should have known better. So today, as we are talking through safety planning and the bits and pieces of it, if you're struggling with it, remember, if this were my kid, what would I want someone in my position to do? As a CASA volunteer, as a child welfare, child protection services worker, a therapist, a judge, a community member, a family member, right? We all have a role to play here because at the end of the day, it could be your kid and you would want the best services possible. We know that problematic sexual behavior initiated by children and teens is fairly common, and the research would suggest that it's the most common form of intrafamilial sexual abuse, sometimes referred to as child-on-child sexual abuse. But we know that children that are in the same immediate social network, and that's where we have to really reconsider how we define sibling, right? Siblings could be biological, adopted, foster, by choice. It could include other kids that are very close to a family, maybe in the same neighborhood, etc. But we know that children will initiate sexual behaviors with other children, and that teens do the same with other teens and younger children. Some more recent research would suggest that upwards of 70% of adults in one research study reported experiencing a problematic sexual behavior initiated by another youth when they were a child. Children's advocacy centers, which I know many of you are not affiliated with, but those one-stop shops after a child makes a disclosure of abuse, they report a national average of 25% of cases coming into their centers being child or teen-initiated sexual abuse. So these children are out there. Sorry, I had an errant slide that made it in there. Who knows? Um, and so it's an issue that is out there. It's an issue that we are paying much more attention to in our country. And I would say really around the world, specifically the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. For sure, those are the countries that are probably doing the most research and working to provide services to these families. It's happening in other countries as well, so I'm not uh, uh, diminishing any other countries' efforts, but those four countries are the ones that tend to be doing the most research. So we know that there are good research-based practices to help these youth. And I'm using the word youth and the word kid or kids kind of interchangeably to encapsulate both children and adolescents. So again, an age range of about 3 to 18. So we know from the research and the literature and the experts that there are good treatments available. There are very helpful responses that we can prevent these behaviors from happening again, and that families can heal and be together in most cases. So as we're talking today, what I'm hopeful you will get out of this is being able to really describe a basic safety plan or the components of a basic safety plan. Today is not training, in-depth training in how to create a safety plan, deliver it, monitor, revise. This is not a deep discussion because we only have about an hour and a half. So you'll be able to leave with a basic understanding of components of a safety plan, some factors that could impact placement of children with problematic sexual behavior or adolescents, and then some factors that would indicate that these kids could be back around other children, or more specifically, the kids that they initiated PSB with. There are a number of free resources that I encourage you to do a deeper dive. I've already mentioned the National Center on Sexual Behavior of Youth, ncsby.org. It is a comprehensive website for caregivers and for professionals. It covers children and adolescents, and it will link you to a ton of other resources as well. There are a number of other resources on the slide that you can find online, free publications or websites. I encourage you to visit those as well. NCSBY, though, will be your primary go-to, or at least I hope it will be. When I worked there, we used to call it NCOSB, but I bet you all can identify the year that we stopped calling it NCOSB. Yep, I see. Yep. Yep, thanks, Priscilla. There was a big head nod there. So we know that sibling relationships are super important. They are a sacred type of relationship within families that often allow children a different level of security and comfort, and also in a relationship in which they can flourish and really develop who they are. Most likely, you will know your siblings longer than you will know anybody else in your life. And so these are really important relationships. They are intended to be safe relationships for all children involved. But we know that there are sexual behaviors between siblings, some of which could be considered normative. Some siblings engage in playing doctor or playing house, and we would expect those behaviors to be within a normative range, right? And so if just kids, looking and showing private parts, it doesn't make it okay sexual behavior, but most experts would agree that's relatively benign and would be considered normative within human development. But we don't have a lot of research on sexual behaviors between siblings, even though we know it is the most common form of intrafamilial sexual abuse. And so we're always looking for opportunities to learn more. But ultimately, at the end of the day, most adults, when they report back on their sexual behaviors as children, would say that these sexual play experiences with their siblings or other kids in their family tended not to have an adverse impact on them in the short term or long term. Again, it doesn't make the behavior appropriate because not everything a kid does in the course of normative development is appropriate or okay, right? There should be adult intervention, education, support, reminding kids of what the rules are around privacy, modesty, etc. So understanding that sexual behavior falls on a continuum from normative into problematic. Problematic sexual behaviors, or PSB, are behavior problems. These are not uh, uh, deficits in a child. It is a behavior problem that has happened. Typically involves private parts or genitals, but it can involve hands and mouths and not genitals. And ultimately, from the research and from the experts, we agree that these are behaviors that fall outside the developmental normative range. So young children who are engaging in oral genital contact, that's outside the normal range of sexual behaviors for children up into adolescence. Interestingly, though, um, I'll be interested, or I am interested in the years coming as more research is done on the impact of sexual media on development. Um, what might be changing because children are exposed to a lot of sexual behavior in the media, and they tend to mimic what they see without understanding motivations or mechanics. So I'm kind of curious as to how sexual media might impact developmentally inappropriate or out of range behaviors. That's something separate though. Problematic sexual behaviors have the potential or actuality to be harmful physically or emotionally, or both. And so here, what I mean by the potential for, most children, for example, don't know the mechanics or the logistics of penetrating somebody with a body part or an object. And so they may attempt to penetrate someone vaginally or anally and really kind of missed the mark, as it were, right? So they've missed the orifice that they may or may not know about. And while that may not cause any harm, so maybe whatever the object or body parts goes in between the other child's thighs, there was a potential there for harm. Um, I think of other harmful behaviors outside of penetration that could be problematic and physical would be chronic masturbation. And that would be to the point where it was causing physical harm to the body. Emotional harm can be fear, guilt, shame, etc. And that might not develop in the other child for several weeks, if not months, or it may be present from the very beginning. Um, we also know that problematic sexual behaviors in and of themselves are not necessarily illegal. And so we have to look um, at local jurisdiction and law to tell us what is legal or not. However, every illegal sexual behavior is clearly problematic. Um, and so we know that adolescents are more likely to be adjudicated of sexual offense, charged and adjudicated of a sexual offense compared to children, particularly children younger than the age of 10. Those age ranges will depend on your jurisdiction and ages for legal sexual behavior and statutes in the communities in which you're working. Problematic sexual behavior as a term is not meant to be anything more than descriptive. It is not a diagnosis. It doesn't give us any information about the origin or the motives for the behaviors. I encourage you again to go to ncsby.org, where you can read more about origins and motivations for problematic sexual behavior, both in children and adolescents. We won't get into that today since our focus is on safety planning. And thank you all. I'm seeing lots of people are um, in the chat. And so that's great. Please use that. And remember, Dijon will interrupt me as necessary. So when a child or a teen presents with problematic sexual behavior, I think there are several misconceptions that can really impact how we conceptualize and then serve these children and their families. So some common myths or misconceptions is that there's something inherently wrong in the mind of the kid. That child or that adolescent has pedophilia, which is a deviant sexual arousal in children. That is exceptionally rare in adolescents and children. It's rare in the adult population overall, but even more so in the minor population. But when you come at a case and you think this kid's has deviant sexual arousal, or there's something wrong with them in their head, that really colors everything you think and do for that child and family. Another belief is that once these kids have had a PSB, they're always going to be a risk. They're always going to be on the lookout for their next victim. And again, that is just not true. We know that treatment is very successful. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But these kids, the vast majority do not persist into adolescence or adulthood with problematic sexual behaviors. Another misconception is that these kids need highly intensive restrictive treatment, like inpatient or residential. Couldn't be farther from the truth. Some of these kids will need that level of intervention. The majority, though, can be served safely in outpatient programs in their community with the active involvement of caregivers. And then lastly, we get to this other misconception that these children just can't live with other kids, that they're not safe. This is what I hear from foster parents or child protection services or welfare workers, that these kids just can't be in another home with other kids. And again, not true. These kids can be safely around other children with appropriate supports and intervention that involve grown-ups, right? Their caregivers are actively involved in services. There's a good safety plan being implemented and monitored by adults, etc. One that really bothers me is about the other child. So I refer to the other child usually as the child recipient. Often that other child is referred to as the victim. When I hear, and this is just me personally, when I hear the word victim, I think of a kid who truly is suffering, has long-term impacts on the behavior. And that's just not every kid that has been on the receiving end of a problematic sexual behavior. Again, I'm not minimizing child victims at all. But we know that many kids that experience PSB, so the recipient children, don't have any long-term adverse effects. They might need some psychoeducational services. They might need therapy. They might not need anything at all other than a brief explanation that what the other kid did was wrong. But a belief that most people have is that once a child has been sexually abused, they're just broken for life. And that really just bothers me. Many of you have experienced sexual abuse as children and are resilient, have come through. So not everyone has long-term adverse impacts. Some people do, some kids do. But when we think of kids, child victims as being broken, again, that just kind of colors what we do and what we think about those kids. I want us to come from a place of, yes, these children may have been significantly adversely impacted or traumatized, but there are good treatment services out there for those kids. There are good things that we can do to help these children heal as best as they can, and knowing that the vast majority will do so. The last misconception here that impacts case decisions often comes from the bench, so from a judge or an administrator who puts in a no contact order between the kid who initiated the PSB and other children. I've worked with many families where the kid who had a PSB was not allowed to have any contact with the other child, often a sibling. And that was the belief that there would be risk and danger. And trust me when I tell you that a quality therapist or providers with these cases will go very slow and steady, will consider every factor before there is contact between children, monitoring how that goes, and then planning for successful long-term contacts. So we know that there are a lot of myths and misconceptions out there. When we look to the research, we can easily tell how those are wrong and what the correct information is. So thinking about safety planning is intended to accomplish a few things. One, it's an immediate measure put in place to ensure that all children are safe, right? Just immediately, whoever is the first person to discover the PSB or the first responder to the family. And this doesn't mean that it's an intense, detailed, articulated safety plan. It just means for now, you need to supervise all of the children in your home. Or for now, your kid, who initiated the PSB needs to have eyes on them much more than usual. Or it may be in some cases that that kid needs to go stay with somebody else. But the purpose here is to get in quickly to ensure that there's safety, to help support a family, to provide and ensure safety. It should be as quickly as possible to get that just a basic, let's get supervision in place, get families connected to services where there can be a more detailed safety plan uh, written out. Other foundations of safety planning include really assessing in your capacity, what are the factors at play here? Where are the strengths and weaknesses, both for the child who initiated the PSB, the other children in the home, and the caregivers, and being able to incorporate that into a basic common sense plan. There's no magic to safety planning. I think, it's great supervision, eyes on supervision. It is ensuring, the kid with PSB is not put in a position of authority over the children, et cetera. And we'll talk more about that in a few slides. Also, safety planning should not stifle pro-social development in children and teens. Often there can be a swift response where suddenly, maybe an older school age child or an adolescent who plays sports, like suddenly they're being pulled out of their pro-social activities. And that may need to happen for a brief moment at the very beginning as we're doing some assessment. Um, but we want kids, children and teens, to be involved in pro-social activities, things that build character, help children learn critical thinking and emotional coping, understand accountability and responsibility. These kids can, for the most part, be around other children with, again, appropriate supports from adults and good supervision. They should continue to attend school, be involved in activities, etc. And by activities at school, in their community, in their home, again, with active adult engagement. Safety planning can be done by a number of people. It's not uncommon across the United States that safety planning for children and adolescents that come in contact with the juvenile justice system is done by a juvenile justice specialist, but child welfare often has their own safety plan ready to go. Therapists are good at safety planning, victim advocates, other people. Remember, many of us working with children, in particular in child maltreatment, know how to do basic safety planning, particularly when a child is maybe at risk of self-harm or suicide, right? We're kind of assessing their level of safety and what do they need. So some of those core foundational concepts apply here as well. We're assessing for what does this kid need? What does the family need, et cetera. So this can be done across disciplines. When a team comes together, though, to help this family, and that might be a multidisciplinary team at a children's advocacy center, or here in Oklahoma, where we have freestanding, autonomous, multidisciplinary teams that are not a part of children's advocacy centers. It could be other teams that come together, maybe in child welfare, et cetera. Once that team comes together, or there are multiple professionals serving the family, there should be really one person who takes on the organization, implementation, and monitoring of the safety plan. That's just an efficient way to do it. That one person would report back to the other partners, and kind of be the liaison between the partners and the family around the safety plan, just as a way to help increase communication, collaboration, and efficiency. And the process should always be collaborative. Remember in our Imagine activity at the very beginning, what would you want other professionals to do if this were your kid? You'd want those professionals interacting with one another, coordinating services, collaborating, including you, when appropriate, including your child or your teenager, in updates and decisions, etc. Collaboration is so important. Not only does it make sure that we're providing the best services possible, but it also means that we have the best chance of engaging and maintaining engagement of a family and services. For people who would be considered first responders, and typically in these cases, that would be child protection services, it could be law enforcement, it could quite honestly be a medical professional. Doctors or medical professionals are often trusted by caregivers who go to them to talk not only about their child's physical health, but also their behavioral health, emotional health, psychological health, etc. So for people who are the first ones to hear about the problematic sexual behavior, as I mentioned before, can do some basic safety planning. And at a basic level here, that is, who are the caregivers, the adult caregivers over the age of 18, who can provide eyes-on supervision of the kid who initiated the PSB? Who are those adults in the home or supports of the family? Because we want to get eyes on this kid at a high level of supervision in the very beginning so that as services are implemented, safety planning is being done, we can monitor and adjust that level of supervision back to whatever new normal will be. Also, first responders can inquire about potential environments in which the kid who initiated the PSB would have contact with other children. That could be, I think, in younger children who play together, maybe in a bedroom. Well, now there needs to be an adult present, or that play has to happen in a public area of the house with an adult present. It could be sleeping arrangements. It's not uncommon for children to share rooms, and in some families to share beds. Uh, a safety plan would be splitting that up or getting creative in how to provide privacy and ensure safety in those situations. And that's really more so if kids are sharing a bedroom. Um, Bathing kids together or having kids, together in the bathroom. If you've got lots of children you're trying to bathe, um, does the kid who initiated the PSB provide any babysitting or childcare? And that's typically going to be adolescents or older kids. That would need to change because we want to minimize the opportunity for the behavior to reoccur. We also want to maximize the opportunity for adults to be there to provide support, guidance, supervision to prevent the behavior from happening again. Then we also need to look at what is this child or teen doing on the internet or on devices, particularly those that have cameras. This is something newer to safety planning, I'd say probably over the last 10 or 15 years as the internet and access to the internet and cameras has become just ubiquitous. So how are they doing on social media? Are they accessing sites that are inappropriate or illegal? Right? How are they being good consumers of media? And so really kind of exploring that. Just again, we're trying to make sure we're covering all of our bases at the first response. That first responder should then be engaging and sharing information appropriately with other partners. And so this is where that collaboration starts to come together and letting the family know who they're collaborating with. For the basic safety plan and then ongoing, when the safety plan is detailed or articulated more, who needs the safety plan? Who needs to know what about the safety plan? And how do we help establish just this process of managing the safety plan, both in who we share it with, how we're sharing information between ourselves and our partners, etc. This really comes back to once a team is involved or multiple service providers, that one person is taking the lead to help outline this process. Again, there's nothing special about this process. Think how you would normally communicate when a child has had a significant behavior problem. How would you want to make sure everyone knows what's going on, who needs to know what, etc. So again, don't overthink it. We know how to do a lot of this. You do this in your work already in terms of coordination, collaboration, etc. You'll see in this last bullet point, certainly there needs to be a plan in place for monitoring the safety plan and providing feedback to the family and other providers so that we are revising that safety plan as needed based on progress or lack thereof. So you'll see here the weekly behavior report. This is something that was developed by the co-developers of trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. It's just a list of some behaviors in very young children that a caregiver can check off daily if that child engages in those behaviors or not. So it's given here as an example. Again, no magic to it. But if you're monitoring behaviors, maybe there is a list somewhere that you have of, did this kid follow sexual behavior rules today? The safety plan, are they following other rules, etc. Just having some system in place where you're remembering to check in regularly, if not frequently, to get that feedback, to get those observations to inform next steps. Oh, we are drinking from a fire hose today, I'm telling you. Fortunately, I'm feeling a little well rested. Remember, I told you I was really tired from riding my bike here today. I didn't sleep well last night. I've got some anxiety about the sun not coming up. But when I got up at about 5:30 this morning, it just dawned on me that it would be there. Um, yeah, unfortunately, also, I just have to tell you really quick. Um, I have some other anxieties as well. Particularly speed bumps when I'm driving in my car, but I'm slowly getting over them right now. I'm slowly getting over them. Great. I've got you all back on track. I see some laughter. Some of you could care less. That's okay too. I just got called bra. I can't tell you, like being called bro or bra, like or dude. I'm like, I'm not quite sure that fits me, but listen, I'll take it. I'll take it. All right. It may seem like we're getting a little ahead of ourselves with this slide about modifying the safety plan, but I think it's important for us to address how we make revisions to the safety plan before we actually talk about what a safety plan is. And again, for those of you that are direct service providers or working directly with children, I know that there's a number of CASA volunteers here, right? So you're working directly with children. Um, we know how to put a monitoring plan in place. And you may be monitoring any number of things, a child or teenager's grades at school, doing chores at home, following other rules, following good sexual behavior rules, right? And so we know how to do that. And it's important that we do that with a safety plan. So we have to have a plan in place for checking in again frequently with a caregiver, with the child. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, Jimmy, people don't always tell the truth. And you know what? You are right. There's nothing we can do about that. Hopefully, we have developed a relationship with a family that we have their psychological safety and that they feel safe enough to tell us the truth. I say that the vast majority of families I've worked with in my career, which now spans 20 years or more, we can build relationships quickly with caregivers and children, and we have their buy-in. And this is why I think that happens, because families do not want their children to persist in having problematic sexual behaviors. Children do not want to persist in behaviors that get them in trouble, right? They are trouble aversive. Families want to keep kids safe. They do not want to get into trouble. They don't want kids to be hurt. Most families are going to be honest with you. It may take some extra hand-holding to do, but that's our job. Our job is there to help. And that means that some families need a little bit more help and a little bit more time. But we are getting feedback from the family. And so we want to make sure that where they are following the safety plan, children, grown-ups, etc., we acknowledge that. We give them praise over that. We want to make sure that we're asking them to help us understand when the safety plan is not followed without judgment. We're just being curious, help us understand so we can support you. This doesn't happen again. I think an example of that for we wouldn't want the kid who initiated PSB to babysit. And there have been some families that just like, my kid is 13. I've got a 2-year-old. I just need to run to the corner store really quick to get something. Or the grocery store is just right down the street, or just got to run to the neighbors to get something. And in that time, another problematic sexual behavior happens, right? it wasn't a malicious non-compliance with the safety plan, but they really didn't think anything would happen in 2 minutes or in 5 minutes. But unfortunately, something did happen or could happen. And so we just want to understand, help me understand. It could be that they're stressed out, they don't have any support. How else am I supposed to get dinner put together? I don't have the mental capacity right now to put all of my children in the car and get them to the store for something I can do in 5 minutes versus something that might take me 20 or 30 minutes to corral everybody. So we're trying to understand what's creating their success and what's creating when there's not success. That we are brainstorming both how do we sustain success, how do we maintain it, and when there's not success or there are problems, how do we resolve that? How do we correct it and get back on track? So you can see it's a parallel process, whether it's progress or lack of progress, constantly getting information, checking in, making revisions and adjustments as needed. So that's that based on available data, preferable from multiple sources. So you might check in with officials at school when children are in school for the year. The behavior probably didn't happen at school or maybe didn't happen at school. The school might not need to know about the behavior, but you might be checking in with someone at the school to ask, how is this kid doing following rules in general? Do they seem to be maintaining appropriate boundaries with other kids, following classroom rules, making it to class on time if they're old enough and are changing classes? You're just collecting some data without spoiling confidentiality of the family or oversharing, right? And so here we just have a plan in place for how do we keep the safety plan at its best, making adjustments along the way. We have to take into consideration that the caregiver will be doing the bulk of the work. And so we need to have some considerations here for caregivers. And that means that the safety plan has to have built in other supports to help that caregiver and has to allow that caregiver opportunities for success to do the safety plan. That means that we're going to have to build in some ways for that caregiver to have time away from their kids, time to use the toilet, time to bathe or take care of hygiene, or just time to be away so they can just reset. And so how do we help build that in at the very beginning? And this is where we just have to be creative. If it's a solo caregiver in the home, how can they use the toilet and make sure their kids are safe, right? Because there's maybe not another adult there to provide supervision. There are strategies for that. Maybe children go into their respective rooms with the door closed. Maybe the use of a door alarm there. We'll talk about video cameras. Those are really should not be used in the vast majority of these cases. Caregivers get really creative, providers get really creative, consulting with colleagues to help problem solve maybe some of these more challenging situations, etc., would be really helpful. So we have to make sure that the caregiver's needs are attended to, that they have the support that will help them. And again, providing them with this guidance around 100% eyes-on visual supervision at the very beginning is recommended. And so that means that that kid with PSB needs to be seen by an adult, eyes on, not looking around a corner, not down the hall, but physically eyes on, unless they are in their room by themselves with the door shut or the bathroom with the same parameters. But when other kids are around, there should be adult supervision. That is unsustainable over the course of a child's development, right, or lifetime. And so we start really strong in the beginning because we're collecting evidence to help us know, or collecting data to help us know how to best support this kid and the family. And then over time, as there's progress, that level of supervision can drop back to what the new normal will be, which might be back to normal if there are no other kids in the home, or some things from the safety plan just become permanent, like children should not be in each other's bedrooms without an adult present, right? Or children should not help each other bathe or toilet. Those could be and should be really pertinent rules that become permanent. Permanent, pertinent, it all sounds familiar. So let's think about rules for children and teenagers. And so we have to make sure that they've got opportunities to experience privacy and to exercise modesty. And so they should have a space where they can take care of dressing themselves, bathing, toileting, and engaging in self-touch or masturbation. Not every family has a belief that masturbation is normal. Some do. We know that the vast majority of boys by the age of 18, it's 85% of boys by the age of 18 are masturbating. The other 15% are lying. And we know um, that about 60 to 65% of girls by adolescents are masturbating. So we know that happens. Let's give them some parameters around that. If you're going to touch your own genitals for any reason, including toileting, hygiene, dressing, or other, that has to take place in the bathroom by yourself, door shut. In your bedroom, if they don't share a room with someone, door shut. Right. And when you are engaging in toileting or hygiene or masturbation, self-touch, however a family wants to word it, you need to wash your hands. You need to make sure that your cleanup is appropriate. Ideally, kids should be in their own bedroom and sleeping in their own bed. Again, that may not be possible depending on the family in terms of the actual living space or family culture. A number of cultures in the world, children share rooms or sleep in the same bed. But for now, again, for now, we want to make some adjustments because we want to make sure we're giving clear messages to that child or teen that of what is appropriate boundaries. It's going to be a little hyper focused in the beginning, but again, remember, over time, as we collect that data, we'll be able to make adjustments. Their monitoring of devices, I think that's become fairly common in a lot of what we as child abuse professionals recommend to families, and even outside of child abuse and neglect. Children are digital natives. Older people like me, we are digital immigrants, right? I am joining a show that I did not grow up with, whereas I've got grandnieces and I guess now nieces and grandnieces. They just grew up with the internet. My grandnieces grew up with a smartphone and access to media any time of day. And so this is just me personally. I think we need to do a better job of making kids and teens informed consumers of media, understanding that media like pornography is fake, that those are paid performers, that what they see in music videos, movies, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, or X, whatever we're calling it now, right? Helping them be informed consumers about it. But we should be monitoring their use of those devices and the internet, just like we should be monitoring their relationships with their friends, their work at school. If your adolescent is working a job, you should be checking in, just monitoring, right? And we should really be working to minimize exposure to sexually explicit, right, out of the developmental norm. I once worked, and this is years ago, decades ago now, with a young father who had a 3-year-old with problematic sexual behaviors. And over the course of treatment, I learned that the 3-year-old's favorite movie was the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'd say that's a little bit out of the developmental norm for a 3-year-old. And it was helping that father, right, that parent understand how that could be impacting his child, right? So we just want to make sure that we are helping families understand how the world around them is impacting their children and how we can help minimize impact to materials that are potentially illegal or not developmentally appropriate for kids. Video cameras have become absolutely everywhere. Your doorbell, your glasses, there's a new push, I think, by Google for video and capable eyewear. And so it's only natural that families and some professionals would say, oh, you need to put video cameras up in your home. I say that that should be a last resort. There's a lot we can do to help manage safety planning, supervision, and et cetera in a home that doesn't involve the use of video cameras. If you use a video camera, there are some issues to think about. One, someone's got to watch all that footage. Who's got time for that? I ain't got time for that. A parent who's trying to do good supervision, work a job, take care of other kids, have life, They don't have time for that. Right? And so there's that. Um, Two, it could signal to the child or teenager, you just don't trust them, right? And we're trying to enhance trust, we're trying to promote compliant behavior. This could really detract from that. Another potential issue is when it is placed, those cameras are placed in bedrooms. I worked with a family that kept a video camera in their child's bedroom or bathrooms. That's problematic for a couple of reasons. Let's start with the most significant. You could be doing something illegal by recording a child when they are undressed, right? On the toilet, in the bath, touching their own genitals. And just besides, how creepy is that that someone is recording you while you sleep or while you're pooping? I can say pooping, at least I didn't say the other big word, right? Again, it just doesn't convey the right thing, right? Um, and so again, if it doesn't allow the child privacy or opportunities for privacy, that's problematic. I'd say it's only in the most significant cases where nothing else seems to be working to ensure safety that a video camera should be considered. And then it really needs to be thoroughly thought through and planned for when it will be used, how it will be used, and when it can go away, right? The vast majority of kids will respond to a safety plan without monitors like that. Now, the use of an audio monitor, like a baby monitor or some type of two-way audio system, those can be used, particularly in cases where children maybe are sharing a bedroom and there are some other things put into place to ensure privacy and safety. Um, an audio device could be really helpful. It should never replace visual supervision when that is possible. Um, so it's just, again, being really thoughtful. Now, you've heard me talk about sexual behavior rules. I've said it a few times. And so these are basic rules for children. And I really think these could be adapted even for adolescents. Um, and so the basic rules here that we want children to follow, it's not okay to look at other people's private parts in person, in pictures, on video, on the internet. Just not okay to look at other people's private parts. It's not okay to show your private parts in person, on video, in a picture, etc. It's not okay to touch other people's private parts with your own private parts, with your hands, with your feet, with your elbow, with your mouth, with your toy truck, with a crown. Just don't touch other people's private parts. Not okay to use sexual language. This one, I, most kids don't use sexual language, but some kids grow up in homes where that language is used commonly. They're allowed to use that language. And particularly, we know adolescents are more likely to use sexual language as a part of their normal development. So this is one where we are being just considerate. It's not okay to make other people uncomfortable with your sexual behavior. That could be sexual humor, poor physical boundaries without touch. It could be kissing, etc. There are a number of sexual behaviors that don't have to involve genitals that make other people uncomfortable. There is one rule around self-touch. And often when I was doing clinical treatment, we phrased it as, it is okay to touch your own private parts as long as you're in private and you don't take too much time. Private places, bathroom, bedroom, door shut, by yourself. Kids have to touch their own genitals to use the toilet, for hygiene, and for dressing. If a family, that's it for them. If they don't think masturbation's okay, then that's it for them. But for families that understand that kids are going to masturbate, it wouldn't fall in here as or would fall in here as well. This could be modified to it's not okay to touch your own private parts when other people are around. Um, that has been acceptable to some families, but we're giving some parameters. Remember, some kids can have problematic sexual behaviors related to chronic masturbation. And so these sexual behavior rules become part of a basic safety plan. We would give families a handout with the sexual behavior rules on them and be like, we can start here, add some good supervision by a grown up, we're off to a great start. The sections of a safety plan um, really try to capture all the places where there needs to be structure and expectations set. My friend Nikki in North Carolina breaks up safety plans also into environments. So when children are in public spaces in their home versus private spaces, when they're out in public, um, There are a number of ways that you can do this. So the basic sections of a safety plan are around rules and expectations for the child who initiated the PSB. These might look like something um, like that child won't babysit, won't go into siblings' bedrooms, won't have siblings come into their bedrooms. So there are the rules for the kid who initiated the problematic sexual behavior, which basically encapsulate don't be around other children without adult supervision. That's ultimately the caregiver's responsibility, but children have some responsibility there too. Activities that the kids can do together. You can still watch TV or movies, play games, again, with an adult present, with good physical boundaries. You can laugh and play with each other. This last one here around showing appropriate affection can be culturally informed. Um, Hugs can be okay, usually as side hugs, maybe not in the beginning as we're trying to understand that the children understand what the rules are. Typically, kisses are not recommended, but if there needs to be a kiss, in Oklahoma, there are many Christian denominations here that a hug and a kiss when you go to church is common. That's also common in other cultures. It's a kiss on the cheek, not on the lips, right? Adult present, permission, etc. It's going to sound like we're being overbearing, but in the beginning, remember, we're just trying to collect some data to see how much do all the children understand about safety and where do we need supports. Family activity supports and agreements. This is that the family just agrees to be kind and respectful, support one another, enforce modesty in the house, that kids have got opportunities to talk to grown-ups when they have questions. You can find the safety plan, by the way, on ncsby.org. So you can look through a whole safety plan template there. Caregiver responsibilities we've been talking about, supervision, monitoring children, and then clear instructions for what to do if the safety plan is at risk. So if a kid is thinking about breaking the rule, go get an adult. If someone has broken the safety plan, go get an adult. If it's the caregiver that didn't follow the safety plan, they need to reach out to an adult, right? A service provider or a support. So the sections of the safety plan, again, just go over multiple areas. It's important that safety plans not just be no, don't stop rules. Safety plans need to incorporate what kids can do together, normal activities, right? These kids could be having contact with each other. They're clearly having contact with other kids. Let's let them know that you can still be kids and still be a family. Moving into placement, we want to, when a problematic sexual behavior has happened, we want to take into account um, the extent of the behavior, the impact on other children, and when does a kid need to be removed from the home? Often, it's recommended that when a child is removed from the home, it's the kid who initiated the PSB. That may not always be the case, but we want to be thoughtful. Does a kid need to be removed? And that could be because that kid is continuing to break all kinds of rules. The recipient children in the home or other children in the home seem to be having an adverse experience from that PSB. Caregivers that may struggle with providing supervision or support for their children, etc. Those can all be factors that child welfare services or child protection services, DHS here in Oklahoma, Department of Human Services, would take into account. As a therapist, I cannot recommend removal of a kid that is outside of my scope of practice. That comes to the authorities or the caregivers to make those decisions. I can certainly give my professional opinion on how the child is doing following rules and therapy, etc., within the scope of my services. But ultimately, that decision happens someplace else. And I, as a therapist, am just a member of the team supporting that decision maker. So we have to consider who I work with a family. There were 4 or 5 children. They couldn't find a placement for the older kid who initiated the PSB, so they removed the other 3 or 4 children. That was a significant burden on the caregiver, who was a solo caregiver, trying to maintain visits with all of her kids, services for most of her children, and working a job. Um, Sometimes there's not another option, but really being thoughtful who to remove, where they are going, um, and immediately upon removal from the home, what's the reunification plan? So we want to get that started soon. And so ultimately, and ideally with most families, they're going back home to their original home. Um, that's just the start of the reunification plan. Any decisions about placement should all be collaborative and communicated within the team of providers working with the family. Some kids may be considered for inpatient or residential treatment. I'd say that most do not need it. Inpatient treatment is designed to stabilize children and teens who are actively suicidal, homicidal, or psychotic. Inpatient might be needed for some kids with PSB where the behavior is um, highly persistent, aggressive, violent, and that child cannot be maintained safely in their community despite appropriate adult intervention. Inpatient is generally short term, think months, again, for the purpose of stabilization. Residential treatment tends to be a little bit longer term for many children and teens. Um, and so, again, it's being thoughtful. Is that the level of treatment that a kid needs? Most kids respond well to short-term outpatient therapy. We know that there are success rates, hear me on this one, 97 to 98% success rates in short-term outpatient therapy. Short-term can be as few as 13 sessions with preschoolers, about 16 to 18 sessions for school-age children, and 6 months to a year for adolescents. Highly effective. We know that inpatient and residential treatment can be difficult for families in many ways. Transportation to facilities, participation in treatment services, and hours that work well with work schedules. It also takes children out of their natural environment, which, if needed, is the appropriate thing to do. But if this child can be served safely in their community outpatient, taking them away from their natural supports out of school systems, etc., can have an adverse impact. And there might be a financial cost to the family outside of transportation. So it's really being thoughtful what is needed. Inpatient and residential is needed for some children. Clearly, it's an important service. But most children with PSB, again, with a good adult engagement in services and supports, can be served in their communities. Now, if a child is removed from their home, how do we know when it's safe for them to go back, to be around the other child, to be back in that home? Well, we know that if the kid who initiated the PSB denies the behavior, minimizes the behavior, has ongoing problematic sexual behavior or other non-compliant behaviors, that's a contraindication. If the child recipient is continuing to experience trauma symptoms or other adverse symptoms related, that's a contraindication. Caregivers, if they're denying or minimizing the problematic sexual behavior, if they're blaming the child victim or recipient, if they themselves are having their own trauma symptoms or other adverse symptoms, those are all contraindications. And clearly, if they're not willing to be involved in services, monitor and implement a safety plan, or support their children, that's a big red stop sign. So if children who initiated the PSB or teens who initiated the PSB accept responsibility for their behavior developmentally appropriate way, right? How a 3-year-old does that is different than a 10-year-old, 13-year-old, an 18-year-old, right? But if they've gotten treatment services, they're making progress in treatment, if the other child's functioning is doing well, if that's in treatment or maybe they didn't need therapy, and the caregiver is on board supporting all the children, following recommendations, working with the team, then we know that lends to there to be visitation between children when they have been not together, and then reunification if that's part of the permanency plan. And remember, today is just a high-level overview. I encourage you to go to ncsby.org. Thank you, Dijon, for putting that in the chat, where you can learn more. The many more nuances to removal, visitation, reunification, etc. And that's where we rely on our partners that do child welfare services, because that is typically their scope of work, collaborating with multidisciplinary team partners, etc. We are a part of that puzzle. When it's decided that the kid who initiated the PSB can be around other kids in the family, be back in the home, be around the child that they had the PSB with, um, that needs to, again, it sounds like I'm repeating myself a lot, collaborative and well coordinated. The caregivers should be on board. The children should be on board. The service providers should be on board. Everyone is on board. If someone is not on board, that's a discussion, trying to understand more. Often where I see caregivers being at odds are when those caregivers are not together anymore. They have terminated their relationship, and often in these cases, they have a rather acrid relationship with one another, and there are custody issues. But that's not every family. Sometimes caregivers are just scared and don't want the kid who initiated the PSB back in their home. Or it might be a step parent who their loyalty is more to their biological child rather than their stepchild. So it's about understanding, helping caregivers to know what supports are possible, right? And in some ways, just what requirements are going to be. A caregiver could technically abandon their child, but then that means that they would be reported to the child abuse hotline, they would be investigated, etc. Because some parents, quite honestly, are so stressed out about it, like he'll just never come back to my home. You don't get to say that. Well, I shouldn't say that. Like that isn't fully your decision to make. And so again, it's trying to understand what's going on, what supports and services are needed. But once that decision has been made, everyone's on board. This is a gradual stair-step process with constant monitoring and evaluation. And by stair-step, you can see this five-step process on the side of the screen. Again, thoughtful, intentional. There's no race here. So the decision's been made. The kids are getting services, or at least the kid with PSB is getting services. Caregivers are involved. We're going to move toward visitation, reunification, meeting with the caregivers. Let's make sure our safety plan is where we want it to be. Let's talk about what concerns are, what will you need for these things to happen. That might be one or two sessions to get all of that lined out. How will we approach the children? And then meeting with the child or teen who initiated the PSB with their caregiver. Here's what's going to happen. What do you think about that? What do you need for help? How will you follow sexual behavior rules and other rules in the safety plan? If the other child is in therapy, connecting with their therapist, to have similar conversations with that child, what will it be like for them to be around their sibling or the kid who initiated the PSB? What do they need, etc. And then we're planning first contact. First contact can have a few functions. First, for children just to have a safe space to interact. The safety plan to be reviewed with everybody in the room. An activity for the children to engage in to practice boundaries. So think like a family drawing activity, usually something without rules, like a game, right? Where one kid's a winner and one is not. So usually like a family drawing activity or other kind of fun activity that doesn't involve a winner, where kids can practice skills and caregivers are practicing skills along with them. And if an apology letter was written, which is often the clinical activity for the kid who initiated the PSV, and the team has decided that that should be shared with the other child, and that's not always a requirement or needed, then some of these first contacts would include sharing of the apology letter with therapists present and processing that. After a couple of office-based visits, you would move into the family having visits outside the office. So again, in a public space, a shorter period of time, maybe an hour, hour and a half. If there's progress, that happens maybe twice a week, then maybe bumps up to 3 hours a week. Continued progress that turns into half a day, a full day, an overnight. And by then, the family is really being reunified where the kid has moved back home. Anytime there is a challenge, a barrier, something has happened, the plan stops. the plan might have to drop down a level or two. So that's what I mean here by gradual stair-step process. I'd say for most families, this kind of process can complete within a couple of months easily. Some families need a little bit more time for different reasons. It doesn't need to be dragged out. And preferably, if the child who initiated the PSB is in therapy services, this is starting while they're still in therapy. So they've got the support of the therapist. Sometimes judges will make decisions that visitation and reunification cannot happen until all treatment services are done. That's a bad choice because that leaves the family without additional supports and resources. So at the end of the day, we've talked a lot about safety planning, first responders, more detailed safety plans, placement decisions, reunification. I want you to take a moment and think about what would you want if this were your family and your child? Would you want these things? Would you want people to do more, use different language? And let that guide you in how you conceptualize and work with these cases when they come into your professional or maybe even personal life. I hope today that you learned the basic components of safety plans, some factors that impact placement and reunification, and have a better sense that these children and teens who initiate problematic sexual behavior are just that. They're children and teens who respond very well to therapy services and adult intervention, kids who grow up to be healthy, great adults without long-term problematic sexual behaviors. Thank you for prioritizing your time again today to be here with me and to listen. I will drop my email in the chat. You are more than welcome to contact me. Again, I encourage you to go to ncsby.org to learn more about safety planning in this population and explore those resources.